Now I'd like for us to look at the Ten Commandments. I guess that's one of the ubiquitous things about Christianity. Even if somebody's not a Christian, they at least know the phrase, the Ten Commandments. And at least if they don't know what they are, most everybody is familiar with them. But the background to them is interesting. Now, the Ten Commandments are found in the Old Testament, both in the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy. And the context is that, of course, the Hebrew people had left Egypt under Moses, and they miraculously crossed the Red Sea as the Egyptians were pursuing them. And they camped in the wilderness at the foot of a mountain called Mount Sinai. Now, no one knows where Mount Sinai was. There are different opinions about it, but in reality, nobody really knows where Mount Sinai was. But anyway, there they were, camped at the foot of the mountain, and Moses would go up the mountain, and there God would talk to him. And so Mount Sinai was a place where God talked to Moses. And it was a place where God was, physically was. So one day God told Moses to go down to the people and remind them how he had led them out of Egypt and delivered them from the armies of the Egyptians. He told them to tell the people that if they would obey him, they would be a treasure to him and they would be a holy nation. If. Okay, a covenant is something that two parties agree to. A covenant is when I say, if you do this, then I will do this. It's a mutual agreement. You agree to do this, I agree to do that. So God was making a covenant with them. If you will obey me, then you will be a treasure to them. There's an if. Sometimes people, especially in modern day Christianity, forget that. There's an if. So Moses went to the people and told them God's proposal, and they agreed to it. So Moses goes up the mountain and tells God that. And God said, okay, in 3 days, I'm going to come down here in view of everybody on Mount Sinai. And this will let the people know that it really is me you're talking to. That you're just not coming up here and coming down and making this stuff up. So God told Moses, said, don't let anybody touch this mountain or go near it. If they do, they'll die. So Moses went down and he told the people, and on the 3rd day, there was thunder and lightning. A big, thick cloud descended on the mountain, and everybody was scared. They all stood there staring at the mountain. It looked like it was on fire. Pillars of smoke came out of it. The whole mountain trembled. Moses spoke, and God answered him with a voice. Said, Moses, come up here. So Moses goes up the mountain, and God says, now you've got to remind the people. They can't touch this mountain. They can't even go near it. Because if they do, they'll die. So Moses goes down, and he reminds the people of that. And then it said that God spoke the words of the Ten Commandments. And afterwards it says that the thunder and lightning and smoke intensifies so that everybody was terrified. But God told them not to be afraid. He told them that this has happened, that God had come to them like this to put the fear of God in you so you'll obey him. And so Moses goes back up the mountain, and God gives him a bunch of other commandments in addition to the first 10. Those are found in Exodus 20 to 23. And we'll talk about them in a few minutes. Now, from the way the text reads, it's unclear when it says that God spoke the words of the Ten Commandments. It's unclear if all the people heard them or if just Moses heard them. So that's not clear from the text. Well, I want us to look at the Ten Commandments. The first is, you shall have no other gods before me. Literally, that is, you shall have no other gods except me. In other words, you are to worship no other gods. You know, we've talked in here before about the concept of other gods in the Old Testament. Sometimes other gods are portrayed as being false gods. Other times, other gods are portrayed as being genuine spiritual beings that people worship. So you are to worship no other spiritual beings except God. Now, the second commandment is a little more confusing. Literally, what it says is, you shall not make idols or a likeness of anything in the sky, on the earth, or in the sea. Now, a lot of us are used to hearing that translated, you shall not make graven images. We tended to shorten it and say, don't make idols. Now, when we think about idol, we tend to think of some kind of statue or something that people represent a god with, like you carve a statue or something out of wood or stone and worship it. And that's what most people think of. But actually, this commandment prohibits any kind of pictorial drawing, statue, picture, or whatever of God. It does prohibit making false gods, like I'm going to make a statue of a cow and worship it or something. But it also prohibits representations of God himself. Now, the second part of that is the most interesting to me. It says, do not make a likeness of anything on earth, anything in the sky, or anything in the sea. And that word likeness means a picture, an image, or a representation of something. And so this commandment does prohibit pictures, drawings, statues, anything like that. It's important to remember that it is not just prohibiting worshiping something. It's prohibiting the making of them and the having of them. Now, people say, oh, well, what it really means is, how do you know what it means? We know what it says. So let's go on what it says. And it says, you cannot make a representation of anything on earth, in the sky, or in the sea. So if you have a painting hanging on the wall of your house of a vase of flowers, that's a prohibition of that commandment. If you have a nice photograph of a sunset, like that you took at the mountains or something, hanging on your wall, it's a prohibition of that commandment. Now to the next one. It says, do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And frankly, on this one, nobody knows what that means. You know, when I was a kid, we were sort of taught that it meant not to use cuss words. I guess maybe it includes that. But the concept of the name of God is a theological term. It is found in a number of places in the Old Testament, and really nobody knows what it refers to. That the biblical scholars disagree about that. There are different opinions about what the concept of the name of God means. And so it's impossible for us to determine what it means when it says, do not take the name of the Lord in vain. And I hate to say that, but we just have to leave that one as a mystery. That doesn't mean you won't run into people who will tell you exactly what it means. I'm sure you know something. The next commandment is about keeping the Sabbath. And this one is very clear. It actually tells you exactly what to do. it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now, holy in the context of the word used here does not have a religious connotation to it. The word holy means different. In other words, you are to remember the Sabbath day to keep it different. It is to be different than the other 7 days of the week. And then it specifically tells you how to make it different. You are to do no work on the seventh day. That's what it means. And it's very clear. You can't do any work yourself. Your family members can't do any work. Your guests can't do any work. Your employees can't do any work. And your livestock cannot do any work. Under this commandment, you are breaking it if you ride a horse on Sunday, because you are making your horse do work. And this commandment gives us the reasoning behind it. The reasoning behind it is that in 6 days God labored and created the earth and everything in it. On the 7th day he rested and made the 7th holy. Remember, that's not religious. It merely means different. And the way you make it different is to do no work on that day. Be sure and realize this is not presented as making the Sabbath a religious day. That's not what it is. It's a vacation day. That's what literally the Sabbath is. Now the next commandment is to honor your father and mother. And this is sort of like taking the name of the Lord in vain. It's a subject of controversy. Nobody really knows exactly what that means. I have heard interpretations of it that say that this is directed at children, that they are to obey their parents when they're growing up. I have also heard it interpreted as saying that you are to respect your parents. And I have also heard it interpreted as meaning that you are to take care of your parents when they get older. I think we have to leave this one in the category, we can't say for sure exactly what it means. Exactly what does it mean to honor your parents, you know? I've had people ask me that, like when their parents needed help or something, they say, you know, they're not obligated because they're commandment. So we get a lot of opinions about what this means. But really, if we're going to stick with just what the Bible says, remember that's what we always ought to do. We don't want to stick with what somebody tells us it means. We want to stick with what it says. But whatever it does mean, it concludes with a promise. And it said, if you honor your parents, you will live long on the good land. Now, with that honoring parents coming with the reward, the flip side of that, though, is apparently that if you do not honor your parents, you won't live long on a good land. Now, the next one says not to commit adultery. And again, this is a very plain one. There's no question about this one either. What that word means there, adultery, is translated as adultery, is having sex with someone who is married to someone else, or having sex with someone when you're married to someone else. It does not mean having sex before you get married. It means that two people have sex and at least one of them is married to someone else. That's adultery. And so people are not supposed to do that. Keep in mind that at this time in the Old Testament history, it was not uncommon to have multiple wives. Just keep that. Now for the next commandments, we get into some really gray areas. We get into definitions that are fairly easy to tweak to enable us to do what we want to do. The next one is, do not steal. Now that may seem straightforward. You don't need to come into our house tonight and steal our TV. I mean, that would be obviously stealing. If you just walk in there, pick it up, and walk out with it. That's obviously stealing. Why is it stealing? Well, it belongs to us. Well, why does it belong to us? Well, you could say, well, because Wanda and I bought it, so therefore it belongs to us. But you know, there's some people that don't look at things that way. And you know, we don't look at it that way. Maybe somebody thinks we owe them money and we haven't paid it, so the TV belongs to them. Maybe somebody's jealous because we have a TV and they don't. Or they like ours better. Their TV's not as good. And they say, well, they don't deserve that TV. How big can I want money to buy that TV? Why do I have the money to buy that TV? Maybe they feel like they deserve a TV like ours, but can't afford it. Ours is not an expensive one. Half of our living room wall is not a black screen. Ours is about like this. But anyway, maybe they think they deserve it for some reason. There are any number of ways people and we could justify, well, that's not really stealing. There's a number of ways we could justify taking something that technically does not belong to us if we feel we deserve it or been cheated out of it or something. So thou shalt not steal is really easy to wiggle out of. Well, it's not really stealing. Now the same thing holds true for the next one. It says do not kill. And literally that does say do not murder. And murder in a moral sense here means killing another person without justification. So you see in the wiggle room that's here. Who gets to decide when killing is justified and when it's not? Well, I'm not talking about the law. We're not talking about when is it against the law to kill someone. We're talking about when is it morally unjustified to kill someone. The law and morality get at two different things. So who decides in a moral sense when killing is justified? Who decides that? The next one says, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, we always like to think of that as a prohibition against lying. And although the New Testament does prohibit lying, be interested to know that this is not a prohibition on lying. This seems to be worded in such a way that it means don't give false testimony in some kind of dispute settlement procedure or some kind of legal proceeding. The way we would probably word this today is if you get called to the witness stand to testify to something involving your neighbor, don't lie. It seems to have more of a connotation of a legal proceeding than a prohibition against lying in general. And the last one says, do not covet your neighbor's house, wife, property, servants, livestock, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now the word covet there means to have a strong desire for something. And so you're not supposed to have a strong desire for something that your neighbor has. And again, we come to a place where interpretation makes the difference. Your neighbor has a super nice house. What nicer than yours? And boy, you'd really like to have that house. But now I don't covet it. You see, so I don't think anybody has ever, we may be guilty of all the rest of them, but I don't think anybody's ever been guilty of this one. Because, well, no, I don't covet it. I don't covet it. And I've heard people say that a million times. So, how much can you desire it without it being coveted? I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing. I've never crossed that line. And so, my guess is that none of us have ever crossed that line, and none of us have ever committed that commandment. We've never done that. Now, but sometimes this commandment is interpreted allegorically. Some scholars say that the other commandments regard your actions, the things that you either do or do not do, while this commandment refers to your state of mind, your thoughts. So this commandment is telling us to have a right frame of mind. That's how some biblical scholars interpret that. It's not what it says, but that's what some people interpret that. Now there are many, many, many different interpretations of these 10 commandments. Christians do not agree on what they mean. I always got the biggest kick out of a gas station if you're going up 18 before you get where the 4-lane is. They made a big deal, about several years ago, posted the 10 commandments in the window, and they were open on Sunday. But they just said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. They left out the part, 6 days shalt thou labor, do all your work. I used to get a big kick out of that. So, now we looked earlier at how the Hebrews got the 10 commandments. The people assembled near Mount Sinai, and the implication is that God appeared there, and this is what came out of it. And then right after that, Moses goes up the mountain, and God gives him a whole bunch more commandments. And God says that he just came down on the mountain on the first there, just so that people would know that Moses was telling the truth. And then so he got the rest of the commandments up on the mountain. And so here, these are also laws that the people were supposed to live by, and they were part of the if you will do this, I will do this then. I just look at some of them. If you hit your mother or father, you are to be killed. If you commit murder, you are to be killed. If you beat your slave and he dies immediately, you will be punished. But if you beat your slave and he lives at least a day afterward before he dies, you won't be punished. If you have a bull, you know that it's me. And if that bull kills somebody, you are killed. Anyone who has sex with an animal is put to death. If you loan money to someone, you cannot charge interest. And yes, it does literally say that. You are prohibited from receiving gifts. Listen to this one. If anyone sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not depart as the maidservants depart. If she be not pleasing to her master after she has betrothed herself to him, he shall let her go free, but he is not at liberty to sell her to a foreign nation because he has trifled with her. And if he should have betrothed her to his son, he shall do according to the right of daughters. And if he takes another to himself, he shall not deprive her of necessities and apparel. And if he will not do these things, she shall go out free without money. So these are laws governing you selling your daughter as a slave. Other things are more mild. One says, you shall not hurt a stranger nor afflict him. You shall hurt no widow or orphan. If you do, though, God says this, I will be very angry and will slay you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children shall be orphans. Another one that is interesting is you shall not revile the gods. Revile means to speak abusively of, to criticize a hostile way. So you're not supposed to speak abusively of and criticize the gods. Who are the gods? Other interesting things include that slaves are to be freed after the 6th year. If you are a farmer, you farm for 6 years and then you let your fields lie fallow on the 7th. Remember we talked about this before. This is the concept of the Sabbath. We talked a long time ago about the concept of cycles of seven in the Old Testament. This is the concept of the Sabbath applied to many things. Now, although we tend to look at the Ten Commandments as a set of 10 self-contained, they're not. They're just a small part of a whole group of laws that the Hebrews were given at that time. And I really think it's a mistake to separate just the 10 out. There's no basis for doing that in the Bible itself. They were given in a set with many others. So let's see what happens after the 10 Commandments. Moses goes up to the mountain and he gets all these commandments. And then he goes down the mountain and he tells all these commandments to the people. And he says, will you agree to do all these things? And they say, yes, we do. And then Moses sits down and he writes them all down. And later, God calls Moses up the mountain. And God tells Moses that I'm going to give you tablets of stone with these things written down in my own handwriting. And for 6 days it says the glory of God was on the mountain, and a cloud covered it. On the seventh day, God called Moses up to the mountain, and it says that what he calls the appearance of the glory of the Lord was as burning fire on top of the mountain. And Moses goes up and remains there for 40 days and 40 nights. You know what the Hebrews did while he was up there? That's when they made the golden calf. And when they got the golden calf made and they were all partying around the golden calf and all, that's when Moses started down the mountain with the tablets of stone that God himself had written on. And when he got down there and he saw that golden calf and saw them all dancing around it and all, he got so mad that he just threw down the tablets of stone that God had written on, and they just looked awful. And so that's the 10 Commandments and the context of it.